Hey everybody, my name is Darian Dozier and welcome to Melanated and Educated. Hey guys, welcome to Melanated and Educated. My name is Darian Dozier and I'm going to be telling you about my COMLEX and USMLE experience. So just to give you guys a little background on these two exams. There are two board exams that every second year medical student must take in order to carry on into their third year. One of them is the USMLE exam. That is traditionally for allopathic or MD students. The other is COMLEX exam, and that is traditionally for osteopathic or DO students. So which one to take? Well, if you're an allopathic student, it's pretty much already guaranteed that you're going to take USMLE, and that's the only exam that you'll have to do. Now, some allopathic students are interested in osteopathic medicine and may consider taking the DO boards, but it's pretty rare that that's the case. However, for DOs, we're being pimped out, in my honest opinion, because if there are certain specialties or programs you want to get into, it's expected and sometimes required that you take both exams. Both exams are fairly similar in their scientific content, they're just different in their delivery and their underlying philosophy. As somebody who took both, I can personally say I don't want anyone to come for me about DOs being less than or whatever, because I had to take two separate exams, which means I had to know like my stuff and the allopathic stuff, which essentially do have some overlap, but their presentations are just different. So I personally believe that osteopathic students are being made to pay more money and take more time for these exams. I just, however, am not in a position to be able to do anything about it. But I suck it up and take it. So how did I decide I wanted to take both exams? Well, you're an osteopathic student, you're interested in going into something that traditionally is less competitive, such as family medicine, pediatrics, NMN, I don't know, every time I say that, I can't remember, it's like neuromuscular medicine, so I think it's NMN. Those things really don't require you to take both. And if you like know for sure, like this is what I'm doing, nothing's going to sway me, I already have a job lined up for me, then go ahead and take just the COMLEX, and that is completely fine. The exams are pretty expensive, they're like $600 each, so it would be financially wise for you to know exactly what it is that you want to do and stick with that. The other thing is that both exams are now pass-fail, and no one really knows how this is going to affect things such as matching residency, because we were the first cohort that had pass-fail boards. So we're all just kind of like guinea pigs waiting to see what happens. So that also is impacting people's decision on whether or not they want to take both. So if you're interested in going into something a little bit more competitive, whether that be the program itself or the specialties such as derm, pediatrics, ortho, etc., you're going to want to take both. And you're going to want to take both if you just don't know. Because the last thing you want to do is be going into fourth year having to go back and take step one because you didn't, but now the program or field that you're interested in requires it. So that was my experience of why I took both, because I'm pretty certain I wanted to do internal medicine. And for internal medicine, I think I could have gotten away with just taking COMLEX. However, I think there are certain programs I'd be very interested in, and many of them said like, we have our DO friends, but we still want to see that USMLE score. So I went ahead and just took it just so I would have that. Another option that you can do if you don't want to take both exams is to skip step one because it is pass-fail. And so what that means is that whenever residencies get your transcript, all it says is you passed or you failed it. There's no score. There's no way for them to tell like how well you did. I mean, you could have just dove over the line and you look the exact same as someone who got every answer right. So, with this being pass-fail, a lot of people are opting to just take step two instead. So they'll take COMLEX level 2 and USMLE step 2. Step 2 gives you a score. So that's useful for comparing you to allopathic medical students who may be gunning for some of those traditionally allopathic program spots. And you don't have to take step 1 in order to take step 2. So that's also an option for anyone who's considering it. My only warning about that would be to make sure that you're not applying to a program that actually wants to see all 3 exams. Some of them do. I think it's a way for them to weed certain people out. But you just want to make sure that that's not the case for you if you're going to make that decision. So just do some brainstorming over the level of program that you would like to apply to, and just kind of start digging and see what their requirements or expectations are. And I think that will really help you make your decision. And at least, it did for me. So that's how to kind of decide which exam that you want to take. Okay, so after you've decided which exam it is that you want to take, now it's time to figure out how to best prepare, because you have to have a plan. This exam is literally over the last 2 years of medical school. So that means that anything you've learned over those entire 2 years can end up on these exams. And that can be like very intimidating, especially when you kind of skipped over some things or just sort of triage some things in the moment and now it's coming back. So you have to have a game plan. And I honestly would not worry about USMLE after first year. First year, you're just trying to get your bearings about you, make it to the next section, and just get a good scientific foundation. If I had to do it again, I may have spent a little bit of my summer after first year just sort of getting a little bit more of a solid knowledge base on things like micro, biochemistry, some of the things that I honestly really did just triage and move through. Because especially things like micro, they never go away, and I didn't know that going into second year. But even with that very first block where we went into nephrology, I mean, obviously lots of micro there. So, if I could do it again, I still would have kicked it like a rock star that first summer. But I also would have made sure to do just a little bit more studying on some of the areas that I'm weaker on, just so I didn't have to work so hard during the year and be like, oh, that's what they were talking about. So I'm going to tell you what I did, and then I'll tell you what I wish I would have done, and then hopefully that helps you plan out, your course of action. So what I did is I did not really start preparing for STEP or COMLEX until January. So I just spent like the first semester, because we really started to dive in some of those internal medicine and physiological systems such as nephrology, oncology, cardiology, respiratory, and then GI and nutrition isn't a whole lot of physiology, but we covered all of those first semester. And so I wanted to make sure that I had like a really good foundation in those before I was trying to dive into board studying, because at that point, you don't really know enough for a lot of the things on the board content to make sense. And so it just kind of seemed futile for me. I probably would have a different approach if I were to go about it now, which I'll get to in a second. But anyways, that was my philosophy for not starting until January. So in January, I created this guy. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, after I booked my exam in January. So then boom, I had a target date. Like, girl, this is your date. Okay. So June 10th is when I took my COMLEX. I actually took my step 1 June 6th. So I had like 3 days in between those exams. So really my deadline was June 6th. But this was how I stayed on top of things. So I just got like a big poster board and just pinned this up in my house, so that way I would, kind of know what it is I wanted to do. And then I just went through all of the topics in first aid, because what I wanted to do was read first aid cover to cover. In addition to that, I had a couple of Q banks that I wanted to use, including UWorld, and I do have ComBank here, but I actually ended up not purchasing it. I just used Kaplan because that was already done by my school. But everything I needed to do to get ready for the boards, I wrote it out and I pinned it up so I couldn't just forget about it. So I just went through the chapters in first aid as they were. I didn't take a specific approach. They go alphabetically. I don't know if it really matters, because by the time January came around, I knew everything except for endocrinology and a couple of pediatric versus geriatric type things. But for the most part, I had learned all of this at some point in time. So now it was time to review that knowledge. And so I just came up with a schedule based on how big the chapters were and how realistically I thought I could get through them. And when you first start first aid, you're like, here. You kind of feel that way the whole time. But, as you're getting through it, you're like, okay, this is digestible, this is easy to read, etc. So every time I got done with the section, I just checked it off and moved on to the next one. And I felt like this really helped me stay on schedule. I got really behind my first couple of months doing this, just because as you're studying for boards, you do not want your actual class grades to suffer. And so you're going through endocrinology, and I wanted to do really well on it, so I spent a lot of time on it, and so therefore some of these things kind of went by the wayside. But the best way to prepare for boards is to be a good student first, and then you can transition into board-specific studying when you get to the appropriate time. But you don't want to forego your grades because you're trying to pass STEP, because at the end of the day, whenever the residencies get your application, they'll see that you didn't do well in a class, but you did pass STEP, and maybe that'll have some sort of impact on your application. I don't know. But anyways, I got caught up over spring break, and that really just helped propel me to get through the rest of this list. So essentially what I did was I would get up in the morning and I would read first aid. I'd have a set number of pages to get through every single day. And as I was reading, I would, make little notes of things that I needed to remember. If I remembered that two concepts connected, I would write that in the margins. I also would highlight certain things. I would highlight key things, especially things that differentiated one disease from another, because that's going to be the key when you're taking an exam. And so, I got through the book fairly okay. I also bookmarked some things I felt like I would keep coming back to, such as gram-positive, gram-negative bacteria. You're always going to come back to those. And then especially the cranial nerves, because a lot of lesions will use loss of cranial nerve function to identify what it is. So things that I thought would come up quite often, I bookmarked, and I can actually go get my first aid book so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so this was my step one book. This thing was like my best friend just last semester. I didn't carry this thing around the first 2 years because it honestly didn't make any sense to me because I didn't know enough for it to. But then in January, I was like, dang, I know what they're actually talking about. So, this is my book. As you can see, it's got notes, it's got sticky notes, it's got highlights. I just wrote all of this thing, honestly. And so I definitely just read it cover to cover just so it would give me a good idea of what I was talking, or just so I would have a good baseline of knowledge for when I go to my practice questions. So, practice questions. I ended up buying UWorld. I tried my best to get out of it because UWorld is just so expensive. And don't get me wrong, it's an excellent resource. But the thing that I don't necessarily understand is how, medical students are notoriously poor. Why do all these resources cost $700-800? On top of exams, cost me $1,200. Last semester was very expensive for me. I don't even want to talk about it. And this semester has been no different because I've had to move. So med school is just running these pockets dry right now. But it'll be worth it in the end. Is what people keep telling me. I'm like, what about right now? Anyways, off my soapbox. I did use UWorld, but I bought the 90-day subscription because I waited so long to buy it. And waiting that long, I wouldn't recommend it just because I had to do like 150 to 200 questions a day, which in the beginning was rough because I was like trying to learn it. And so the review process took a little bit longer because I was like trying to understand so much. The closer I got to my exam, the more the topics kept reemerging. So the faster I was able to get through the test and review them. But at first it was really hard to hit that number every day. And I would be doing like 12-hour days sometimes just trying to like get through a big chunk of questions. So I would probably recommend doing 180. Like I said, I'll get to what I would have done here in a second. But I bought the 90-day subscription, and I started in April, and I just started banging questions out. And let me tell you, UWorld hurt my feelings every day. Every day. It was bad. I mean, there were a couple of times that I was in tears because it's just like you're working so hard, and then you get a 45%. And you're like, what else can I do? But the thing to remember when you're doing this is that UWorld is like, if you're an athlete, I was an athlete, so I'm using this metaphor. When you have that like really like stupid hard practice and like you were running and you're just doing stuff you would never do in an actual game. But then you get to the game, like you're in shape, and like those game time situations that you practice, like you're able to navigate them better, and like all those like endless drills, like you're able to do those skills quicker in the actual game. Like that is what UWorld is. UWorld is that really tough practice, and then that way when you get to the actual exam, you're like, I've seen this before. I know how to do this. I know how to navigate this question, because UWorld is just so hard and it's so specific, and it's a lot more ambiguous. Like they will talk around terms instead of just like naming the term. And so that's just something that you'll pick up on as you start taking more and more UWorld tests. But it can definitely be frustrating in the beginning when you feel like, okay, I'm doing all this work. I've read this stupid book cover to cover, and I'm still getting 55% on these quizzes. And so that's just something that you really have to battle through. And that's where that mental toughness comes in for board prep. So I did UWorld questions, and honestly, during April, I was pretty busy. I had a conference that I went to. So, I traveled to DC and Indianapolis in about the same week. So I was like on the plane buying their Wi-Fi so I could do UWorld questions. And one of my really good friends graduated. So I took the weekend off and went and hung out and got some just like really needed friend time. And, I was stressing, one of my really good friends, I was stressing him out because I was kicking it for like the first month of board studying. But then after I came back from her graduation party, I really did have like 4 to 5 weeks of extremely dedicated time. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't brunch. I didn't hang out with people. I didn't write on my blog. If you follow it, you see that there was sort of a gap of posts. This was why. I literally just studied. Like I woke up, I did UWorld, I went to sleep. I woke up, did UWorld, went to sleep. At some point, I started adding exercise in there, but that was pretty much my cycle for the entire time that I was studying. So I got through UWorld 1 pass. They recommend that you do UWorld for 2 passes. I made it through 1. And then what I started doing is I started creating these, what I consider like my giant flashcards. So I don't particularly care for the little flashcards just because there's only so much you can put on them. And I don't want to know like just like discrete facts. I want to know how one thing compares to the other, and I need to see them side by side. And these give me the room to do that. So for example, I have a giant flashcard over brain tumors, and I literally went and wrote all of the pertinent facts about all these different brain tumors. And then I would go back and study and be like, okay, this is the difference between this one and this one. Because like I said, that is going to be the key to you doing well in all your med school exams, but especially on the boards. Same with antimicrobials. I mean, I put all of them on one giant page. That way I could just look at them all, compare them all, bam, real quick. And I have like, I don't know, some of these aren't even review papers, but I probably have like 15 of these, and I would just review them every day. It was very digestible, very quick, and it was just an easy way for me to continue getting that distinction between them. So that way on the exam, if I'm giving a presentation, I know how to tell them apart. So this is what I used. As far as resources, I also used Kaplan to study OMM. And I also used Savarese, which is the green book, to study OMM. Very easy to read. I read it in a few hours. And I also had, I like OMM, so I had like a good knowledge base already. I was a TA for OMM, so I did kind of have an advantage in that part. But if you're not super familiar with OMM, I've heard Dirty Medicine is great. I didn't use it, but I've heard that it's a great resource. So all of the resources that I would recommend using, first of all, when it comes to resources, you don't want to overwhelm yourself. So you don't want to have so many resources that you can't get through them all. Choose the ones that work for you and write it out. I know that I was advised to use several different things, and I'm like, it's March. I'm going to use the things that I got to use right now. We're just going to stick with that and call it a day. So, when you're using your resources, you want to make sure that you find something that really, really works for you. I felt like first aid was a good, just like, overview. I think almost everyone uses first aid. I didn't run across anyone who didn't personally, and everyone used it in different ways. Some people would do boards and beyond questions and then go back and review that information in first aid. Some people just read it straight through. Some people used it throughout the 2 years. So just find the way that this book works for you. But I would highly recommend this book. And actually, I joined the American Medical Association for $20 for 4 years, and this was a free gift from them. So that could also be an option if you're looking for a way to cut back on some of those costs. So all of the resources that I use Boards and Beyond just to get some of those harder topics, to get like a different type of lecture on them. So Boards and Beyond is a good video source overview. It has notes, it has quizzes, and Dr. Ryan, I think is his name, he's awesome. I'm kind of jealous. I heard he's at UConn, so he is a great lecturer. He just gets right to the point, very simple PowerPoints, and they tell you what you need to know, and just very like consumable bits. So I did use Boards and Beyond. I used this. I also use Sketchy for micro. Sketchy micro is a great it's a great resource if you're a visual learner. The only thing that I would advise is that, in my experience, they only used a few of the little like buzzwords that Sketchy really relies on. And so if you don't actually know the meaning of those buzzwords or what the visual image of those buzzwords are, then it's not the most useful. So just take it a step further and be like, okay, this is their picture mnemonic that they're using. What does that actually look like? Or what is that in words? Like, can you explain it? Because that's how it's going to pop up on your exams. And then I also use Kaplan for OMM questions, and I use the UWorld QBank. Other things that I know people have used, I know they've used Latrio, Osmosis, Amboss, Pathoma. I honestly would have used Pathoma had I started on it earlier. By the time that I was told that I probably should be using Pathoma, it was just too late. I was like, whatever histopathology I'm going to get is going to come out of this book, okay? So those are just a few of the resources. You can also use TrueLearn. They have a good ComBank, and they also have good USMLE prep. So those are just a few of the resources. I'm not sponsored by any of them, so I promise this is all just, personal recommendations that I think may work. Kind of play around with a few of the resources at the beginning of your second year, so that way you can like really solidify how to use a resource, how you like to use the resource before you're like deep into board studying. So just to wrap this up, if I had to redo it all over again, and I did talk about this on my blog, so you can go check out www.melanatedandmeducated.com. It's on the sweatshirt, if you didn't notice. You can find out just a little bit more information that talks about in this video. But if I had to do it all over again, one, I probably, like I said, would have spent last summer just doing a little bit more review on some of those harder topics. Secondly, starting at the beginning of second year, I would have started Boards and Beyond right away, especially alongside some of those harder topics that we were doing. But also, I would have started watching some of the older videos like about neuro, MSK, derm, and micro, and biochem, some of those harder topics that we covered in year one. I would have started reviewing those right away at the beginning of second year. Once I got through that, I probably would have at least done the first 3 chapters of Pathoma, because I've heard that is like really what you want to do for step 1. And all of these things wouldn't have been for me to like get a higher score, because obviously it's pass fail, but it would have made me feel a lot more comfortable once I got to my dedicated period about that foundational knowledge. And then that way maybe I could have gone through UWorld 2 passes. And then I liked my plan of starting first aid in January, just because by then I had so much other knowledge that reading it would have made sense. And if you felt lost reading first aid first year, it's okay, because you probably were. You haven't covered a lot of things, and you have to understand, hematological disorders in order to understand some of the other things that they're talking about in other sections of the book. So don't feel bad if you couldn't use first one the first year. Try again in the middle of your second year, and I promise you so many more things will make sense. Like, you'll just be able to understand the terminology, which is half the battle. So I would have done that again, but I think I would have definitely started UWorld probably around the same time, and I would have gotten a 180-day subscription, so that way I would have only had to do like 40 questions a day versus 120 to 160. I mean, it was a lot of questions a day, and it got to the point where I was feeling like pretty burnt out. But you want to be able to pace yourself, because if you burn out in February and your test is until June, you're going to run into some issues. So I would go really easy, lightweight board prep up until probably 8 weeks before your exam. And then I would take a practice test. So I took one NBME practice test, and I also took the free 120. And I used my results on NBME to sort of guide what I needed to do those last 2 weeks before my exam. And so I only took one. I only had time to take one. That's why I would suggest, like, if you have a dedicated period of anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, that's perfect, because you can take anywhere from 2 to 3 NBME or practice tests or AMBOSS or any of the other practice tests. I also didn't feel bad about only taking one, because our school had us take like 5 or 6 simulation exams. So I had gotten, from the stamina of taking a full length to the content of taking some of those shorter tests like the COMAT. So just, do whatever works for you. But I personally, if I could do it again, would have made my dedicated period anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, and definitely started out with an NBME so that way I can more so tailor my studying. And then I would have like really hit hard on those topics to make sure that those areas weren't weaknesses. I probably would have repeated one at week 6 and week 4, maybe week 2. You don't want to do anything the week before, because if you get a result you don't like, it just totally shakes up your confidence going into the exam. So, I would not take one past the second week. And I also would, take all of the exams with a little grain of salt, because at the end of the day, no practice exam you take is going to be exactly like the real exam. So if you get a good score, don't get lazy, don't start chilling on that. And if you get a bad score, don't become overwhelmed and panic and start moving your exams and stuff. Just work a little bit harder at some of the like overall topics that you're missing, and you'll be fine. If you get to it and you're like, still in the 40s and 50s on these exams, and you're just not understanding certain things, then don't take it. But if you know things and you just like have some like test taking quirks here and there that you need to work on, I would not freak out and start moving your exam and things of that nature. So anyways, that is what I would do if I was able to start prepping for this exam again. Last thing I want to talk about is my experience taking the boards. So like I said, my step 1 was June 6th, and my COMLEX was June 10th. Both of my, like, the whole testing center was like an hour from my place that I lived, so that kind of sucked. But basically, the day before the exam, I did not do any studying. I took my hair down because I had a hair appointment the day after my step exam. I know I'm crazy, but it was the only day that lady was open before I was going to Mexico, so I had to do it. Anyways, so I took my hair down, and I just made sure like I had my caffeine, my lunch, anything I needed for the next morning. I had that ready to go. I made sure that I had printed out all the materials that I needed, and I just like wanted to be very prepared. I double checked my ticket to make sure I had the right time, to make sure I had the right address, and so you just want to use that day before to prep and get your mind right. Then do something that you enjoy. Watch a movie that you really like. Go out to dinner. I mean, just do something chill. Like, don't go out and like do this 5-mile bike ride because you haven't gotten to ride your bike all that. Like, don't do anything like that. Do something chill that you enjoy, and that just makes you feel like happy and relaxed. I would avoid drinking too much alcohol. I would avoid drinking too much caffeine. I would avoid drinking too many sweets or eating bad foods, just because all of those things can really impact how you feel physically, which can impact how you feel mentally and emotionally. And you want to be in a good state in all 3 of those areas before you take this exam. So the morning of the exam, I got up fairly early. I wanted to get to the testing center early because I heard you can start early if you get there early. And I wanted to leave early because these exams are like 8 hours long. I don't know if y'all know that, but they're long exams. So I got up, I got ready. I dress up for exams. I always have dress well, test well. That's just my vibe. You don't have to. A lot of people are in there just looking very comfortable. That's totally fine. I dressed up because it made me feel better. So, I got to the testing center, and I drank my caffeine on the way. And by the time I got there, like, I listened to like my pump up playlist on my way there. Like, I was just doing anything to give me good vibes, to give me a good headspace, to make me feel very confident. And so I just want to put myself in a good headspace before I walked into the building. So I walk in, you check in, you put your stuff away in a locker. USMLE and COMLEX are different because you have access to your locker during your exam. So if you need to look up something during your exam, you can. Obviously, it has to be during one of your scheduled breaks. So whatever question you're looking up is already locked away in a different section. But in case you get it again, you do have that access. So you put all your stuff away, and then you just kind of wait for them to call your name. You go in, they have to wand you, do all the security stuff, and then you go into your exam and you start taking it. Comlex is different from USMLE because USMLE you get a 1 hour break. You can use it however you want to use it. After you get to a section, you can take 5 minutes. You can another section, take 5 minutes. To another section, you can take 10. I mean, you have an hour to use. And then any extra time you have after your sections, all of that adds to your break time. So that is really neat. Comlex holds you hostage for 80 questions. And then you can take a break because they said you could take a break. So I wasn't a huge fan of that because I really had to pee. And I was just stuck in my chair because if you get up in the middle of your section, your test gets flagged for some sort of like weird discrepancy. So anyways, when I went in to take STEP, during the exam, I felt like I was very nervous before STEP because I'm a DO student. I didn't know what I was expecting, what I was walking into, and UWorld had me shook. But that exam was like very manageable. Like it was very clear what they wanted me to get out of the question, how I needed to answer the question. I mean, I walked out of that exam not feeling this huge sense of doubt of it could have been this, it could have been this, it could have been that. It was like I had some questions where I had to make some educated guesses on, absolutely, but I had some questions where I was very clearly able to work my way through the answers and choose the right one. And so I basically took little breaks after every 2 sections, and then after the first 5 sessions, I took probably like a 20-minute lunch break, and then I just like banged out the last 3 sections. There's only 7 sections on USMLE. Comlex, however, there's 8 sections, so it's a little bit longer of a test. And like I said, they hold you hostage. They tell you when you can take a break. And so I don't even think I really ate lunch that day because I just don't think that I was hungry, and I had a flight to catch. So I was like, I'm getting through this exam. They didn't start me until like 9 o'clock. Like it was just like a crazy day. And so that exam, I actually went into it feeling like, oh, well, if STEP was so manageable, then of course Comlex would be manageable, like even more so because this is my exam. This is us. This is what we do. And that was not the case. Not at all. I mean, I was in there like the first like 10, 15 questions like, Lord, it is me again. I mean, Comlex was so hard. It was so hard because I felt like STEP was like, do you get the overall idea? And Comlex was like, do you know this drug on this day, who made this? I mean, it was like very, very specific. And so I had to kind of like canoodle with my classmates after because I was like, was this hard for y'all or did I just not study? Because those 3 days I had between the exam, like I said, Tuesday I had a hair appointment and my hair appointment was by my niece's daycare, so of course I was going to go hang out with her. So that day was a wash. And then Wednesday and Thursday I mostly studied like OMM principles and also like looked at Comlex type questions because they asked them differently than USMLE. But I mean, content wise I already had it. I just took STEP like 3 days ago, So I thought maybe like I just like slept off those days, but honestly, there was nothing different I could have done because the way that they ask the questions is a little bit more vague and it is very specific. It's vague and specific. How that works, I don't know. But it's like one question I remember, they described a teratoma, which is, a type of tumor. And like when they were describing it, I was like, teratoma, yes. I get the answer choices, there's 5 different types of teratomas. I was like, there's 5 different types of teratomas, or is there only one? And I have to know what that thing is called. I mean, it was just like those types of questions. So yeah, Comlex was really hard. When I finished Comlex, I literally was like in the car praying. Like I could not explain to my school how I passed STEP and failed Comlex. I can't do it. So Comlex was definitely hard. Don't sleep on Comlex DO students because I don't know if they're just trying to prove that DOs are just as good as allopathic students. I don't know why we're being punished for this, but Comlex was hard this year for sure. So anyways, after my board exam, hopped on a plane, and honestly, you have like 3 weeks before your scores come out. Keep yourself busy. I mean, you're not gonna do anything but be anxious. Take a trip, do some research. I mean, just go do anything that keeps you busy. I did not stop running after my exam. I left for the weekend and then I came back and then I had a summer camp that I put on at my school. That took a whole week. Then I turned around and went to Mexico. That took a whole week. And then our school started again that next Monday and then my score was released that Friday. So I kept myself definitely running. It was such a relief to finally get that pass on both exams. I was around my classmates when I got the results for one of them, for STEP. And everyone passed STEP. And almost everyone passed Comlex. Our school did pretty well, actually. So it was nice to be able to celebrate. I couldn't celebrate too hard because I went to Essence Fest and got COVID. And so once I found out that I passed both exams, I wasn't able to celebrate right away. But me and one of my really good friends, we went to Houston. We had a very nice dinner to celebrate, and we just went out on the town. So after you take your board exam, give yourself a pat on the back. Do not go and look up answers. You don't want to do it. I'm telling you, you don't want to do it. You've already taken the test. You've already done the hard part. Have faith and confidence in yourself, and just try not to psych yourself out. Like I said, keep yourself busy. Do things that you enjoy. Go on a trip, go on a vacation. Just do anything to get your mind off of it. And if you don't pass, it's going to be okay. Like, I know everyone makes it seem like it's a death sentence when you don't pass on that first one. And for some specialties, it is. I'm going to be very honest with you. But, you know, bounce back from it. Don't let it just knock the air out of you. It happens. And so work with the people at your school, figure out what's the best way to overcome this, and then be prepared to explain to people why you didn't pass, because they're going to ask, and your answer may be the thing that actually does save you and get you into some of those programs. So that was my experience taking boards. If you have any more questions about how to prepare for boards, you can, again, go to my blog because I have a lot of information on there about it. And I hope that this was really helpful. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to try and, you know, do these talks once a month. I am a medical student, so I am busy, so we will see. Anyways, have a good day. Thanks for joining me, guys, and I'll talk to you later.